Hi, this is Bob, exam 77-882, which is our Excel 2010 core. What we are looking at today for this video is module number 5, which is applying formulas and functions, especially 5-4, which is applying cell references inside of formulas. Now, 541 was our last video, which was called the basic if function. If you didn't get to see that video, I would prefer that you would do that now. That way you have an idea where we're going with this video, because that video explains how to use the if function. This one goes in detail using what we call a nested if function. So 542, how to edit a defined condition in a formula. It basically means how to edit an if function. 543, how to use a series of conditional logic values in a formula. Now, conditional logic basically means the if function. A series of conditional logic basically means it is a if function inside of an if function inside of an if function, and on and on. Do you remember from the last video that Microsoft Excel puts in their cell this tip on how to write the if function? If you are in Excel and you type equals if parenthesis, what happens is it puts this tip out there that says logical test, comma, value if true, comma, value if false, close parenthesis. Well, I like to change that because sometimes their terminology to me isn't down to earth. It's not English. So this is how I change it. I say compare, because instead of just saying logical test, I'm thinking in my mind that I'm comparing something. I'm comparing two cells against each other. Is A1 equal to B5, or is A1 greater than D7? I'm comparing. And again, we learned all about the different things that you can compare. Then, comma, true, comma, false. So instead of saying value if true or value if false. Now, right there, it doesn't make much sense. I mean, it's clear right now. We understand logical test means compare. I'm comparing two things. But the value if true, just changing it to true doesn't do anything. Or value if false, changing that to false doesn't make anything, except it just makes it less typing. That's it. So, let me go deeper. Do you remember what those commas represent? The first one means if true, then. So, if the comparison that we are doing, if that comparison is true, then we do the true part. It really helps to understand or to name your commas. And what was the second comma? Do you remember? It was called otherwise. Otherwise, do the false part. If compare is true, then do the true section. Otherwise, do the false section. All right. If compare, comma, true, comma, false. So, questions. What type of things can we put in the true and the false sections? Again, we studied these in the previous video. Let's review what we've learned, and then we will build upon that. We have learned that we can put in words in that section. If A1 is greater than or equal to 15, put hello, or put goodbye or whatever. We've learned we can put words, and the words would be put in quotes. We've also learned that we can put in numbers. If A1 is greater than or equal to 15, put in 1500. Otherwise, put in another number. Okay? We also learned that we can put in formulas. If A1 is greater than or equal to 15, put in the answer to A1 times B7 divided by 2. Or put in a different formula altogether. But I'm just trying to point out that we learned from a previous video that we can put words or numbers or formulas both in the true section and the false section of our if function. But let's go deeper, because I always like to make a big distinction in my introduction to Excel class and say it's not just formulas, but it's also functions. We have to understand that there is a big difference between these. Functions are the ones that have words to them. They start with an equal sign, they have words, and they have something in parentheses. As you can see here, equals if A1 is greater than or equal to 15, then there's the sum function. Sum A1 to A10. See how you have the word there and a set of parentheses? That's the sum function. As a matter of fact, this is called a nested function because the sum function is inside of the if function, you see. So that's kind of important to understand. Now, what type of functions can I put in? Well, let's take a peek at this. One type of function you can put in is a sum function. Well, we just learned that in the previous slide. The next type of function we can put in is an average function. If A1 is greater than or equal to 15, then give me the average, you see. We could also put in a max function. That basically means I can get the highest value. There are so many functions that you can enter inside of the true or false section. Again, you can put words, numbers, formulas, or functions, and there is a plethora of functions that you can enter. However, I want to point out that you can also put in an if function, another if function. You can put an if function inside of another if function. And so this is where it gets confusing at times for people because you only have two commas. You've got the compare, the true, and the false. But if you put an if function inside of another if function, you have another set of compare, true, and false. And then now you've got 4 commas. And if you put it in the false part, you have another set of compare, true, and false. And now you have 6 commas. And then it gets all confusing. Well, I'm here to help you make sense of this. Now, I want to put an if function inside of an if function. In a true or false section, you can put an if function inside there. And this is called a nested if function. Nested means a function inside of a function. A sum inside of an if is a nested function. An average inside of an if is a nested function. But an if inside of an if is a nested if function. Now, why would I even do this? Well, let's talk about this. There are easy functions. This function right here, if A1 is greater than 50, then I want to put yes in the cell. Otherwise, I want to put no in the cell. Now, we've done this before. We've done this in a previous video. Let me show you the answer. Equals if paren A1 greater than 50. That's the if part. Comma. Remember, the comma means if true, then put the word yes in the cell. Comma, which means otherwise, we're going to put no in the cell. So you can see if A1 is greater than 50, if true, then put yes, otherwise put no. Here is another easy one. If cell A1 is greater than 50, then we're going to calculate A1 times 8%. And that is what we're going to put in the cell. The answer to A1 times 8% goes into the cell. Otherwise, A1 times 2%. So you can see that if A1 is greater than 50, this person gets 8% of what he made. 8% of 51, or 8% of 60, or 8% of 90. Otherwise, if he didn't do that well, he's in the 50 or below, then he only gets 2%. So it's like the goal is he has to at least get more than 50. Okay? So if he got 30, he gets 2% of his cells. 30 times 2%. How would I write this? Like this. Equals IF paren A1 greater than 50. That comes from my if statement at the top. Comma, which means then A1 times 8%. Comma, which means otherwise, he gets A1 times 2%. See, these are easy, right? These are easy. But guess what? There's hard ones. This example here shows that I have a scale, and it all depends upon what they make as to how much they get. It's not just, oh, you get 8% if you made the goal and 2% if you don't. It's basically how much money do I make? Did I make under 1,000? Did I make between 1,000 to 1,500? How much sales did I make? Because that determines how much commission I get. So let's say I made $1,650 in sales. Well, I've used this chart here. $1,650 would be on the second to the bottom line between 1,500 and 2,000. That's where $1,650 goes. And I would get 5% of my sales. If you had to write this out in an if function, and you just sit at your computer and you're typing away, it could get frustrating. I want to point out that I found an easy way to do nested if functions. Stay with me and I will show you how I calculate this. So first of all, I change the way it looks. Notice that I don't say between anymore. I say above. So I say if the total sales is less than 1,000, he doesn't get anything. If the sales are above 1,000, he gets 2% of his total sales. If the sales are above 1,500, he gets 5% of his total sales. And if his sales are above 2,000, he gets 8% of his total sales. So changing the chart from this using the words between to this using the word above, it's going to be so much easier. Let me put this chart in the upper right corner here, and let me talk to you about this. First of all, here's a few rules that I follow. I'm only going to do the last one first. I'm only going to figure out the function, the if function, for the last line. Above 2,000, he gets 8%. That's it, the last line. Then I will only do one if function at a time. Well, when I'm done with that one and I have my if function, then I'm going to go up a line and I'm going to do the above 1500. I will create an if function that if the total sales is above 1500, then he gets 5%, otherwise he gets 0. See? You only do one line at a time. And when you finish that one, you go up one more and you do the function for if the total sales is above 1,000, he gets 2% of his total sales, otherwise nothing. Third rule is to put them all together. You're going to have 3 functions. So here we go. We're going to pretend that D7 is our sales. We also have whited out everything in our scale so that you can concentrate on the above 2,000 is 8%. So, step 1, calculate the last line. I like to create this if, then, otherwise in my brain or on a sheet of paper just like this. And I try to figure out that function using this if, then, otherwise. So if sales is above 2,000, well, it does say in my chart up there above 2,000, then they receive 8% of the total sales. And that's what it shows up there. The commission will be 8%. Otherwise, what do they get? Well, nothing. Since we haven't specified what they do get if they don't make the 2,000, we're going to give them 0 because we're only concentrating on that last line. So here's what the function looks like. If D7 is greater than or equal to 2,000, then, love the commas. I love the commas. Then the user, the sales rep, will get D7 times 8%. Otherwise, he gets 0. Now, isn't that a lot easier to understand? Now, you're saying, yeah, but that's just one, right? But it is easy if you take them one at a time. Here is step 2. Calculate the last line again. Notice I have crossed out the last line in our scale at the upper right corner because we've done that one. Our concentration now is on the one just above it, which is above 1,500. He gets 5%. This is our if, then, otherwise chart. If the sales is above 1,500, then, that's my comma, they receive 5% of the total sales. Look over to the right in your commission in the scale at the top. And yes, they will get 5% of their total sales. Otherwise, they receive 0. What does that mean? That means this is our answer at the very bottom. Equals if paren D7 greater than or equal to 1,500. Is D7 greater than or equal to 1,500? If yes, then D7 times 5%. Otherwise, they get 0. But you're saying, but wait a minute, Bob. What if he received 2,600? Because 2,600 is above 1,500. Yes, we're going to come to that in a minute. We're going to compile these into one huge function. Right now, only concentrate on the one that is not crossed off. Well, that finishes with step 2. Step 3. Notice we've crossed off the second to the bottom line. Now we're looking at the third to the bottom, which is above 1,000. So again, step 3, calculate the last line. If you're above 1,000, you should get 2%. So figure in your mind or on a sheet of paper the if part of this, the then part of this, and the otherwise part of this. I'm going to give you a few seconds. What would be the if part? What would be the then part? What would be the otherwise part? Because that's the three sections. Your compare, your true, and your false. Here we go. So your if should read something like this. If sales is above 1,000, then they will receive 2% of the total sales, and the commission is 2%. Otherwise, they receive 0. Again, because we're not worried about anything else except the last one. So if they get above 1,000, 2%. If they don't, nothing. Our function is equals if paren D7 greater than equal 1,000, comma, D7 times 2%, comma, 0. Is D7 greater than or equal to 1,000? If so, then D7 times 2%. Otherwise, 0. So that's step 3. Now, is there a step 4? Well, I crossed off that one, and now we have one left, which is total sales less than 1,000. Think this through with me. If in all of the functions we've just created, above 1,000, above 1,500, above 2,000, if they didn't make it, what did they receive? 0. So if you look at this one here, it says total sales. If it's below 1,000, they get 0. So you really don't have to create a function for it. It's the fall safe. It's the if this isn't true, they get a 0. If that's not true, they get a 0. If that's not true, they get a 0. Hey, they're going to get a 0. So in reality, you don't have to create a function for this one. Step 4, no calculation is needed. This line does not need a function because the sales is below 1,000. They will automatically receive 0. So now step 5. Step 5, put it all together. Now what does this mean? First of all, you have created 3 separate if functions. You've done the bottom one, the above 2,000. There it is. If D7 is above or greater than or equal to 2,000, he gets 8%, otherwise 0. You have done the one that says above 1,500. If D7 is greater than or equal to 1,500, D7 times 5%. You have done the one that's above 1,000. If D7 is greater than or equal to 1,000, D7 times 2%, otherwise 0. We have our 3 functions. I need to be sure that we don't have 3 functions, but we have one huge function. We're going to put a function in a function in a function. Let me show you how to do this. We're going to concentrate only on the D7 greater than or equal to 2,000 function and trying to put the one below that, which is D7 greater than or equal to 1,500, inside of that. We're going to concentrate on the if D7 is greater than or equal to 1,500, that function, how to put that inside of the top function. This is how we do it. This is the function we have. If D7 is greater than or equal to 2,000, then D7 times 8, otherwise 0. That 0 is very important because what you're going to do is put in the other function, the one right above that. So at the very bottom, it's 2,000 in our scale. The one right above that is 1,500. So the if function that calculated the 1,500 value for the 5% is going to go right where that 0 is going to go. Now, stay with me for a second. I want you to notice that the top function has an open parenthesis and a closed parenthesis. This function we're about to put in has an open parenthesis and a closed parenthesis. So, since this is going at the very end, you will have 2 closing parentheses. So let's see how this looks when we put them together. There you go. Equals if D7 is greater than 2,000, then D7 times 8%. Otherwise, if D7 is greater than or equal to 1,500, he gets D7 times 5. Otherwise, 0. That's a function inside of a function. Notice there are two closing parentheses. There's an open parenthesis and a closed parenthesis for both functions. Let's go a little bit deeper, because now we are still putting it all together. We are going to take the function we just created. Now we have to put in the function that says what happens if it gets above 1,000. Well, here it is. If D7 is greater than or equal to 1,000, he gets 2%. Otherwise, 0. Now understand, we are going to put it right where that 0 is. And this is how it looks. This is how you read it. If D7 is greater than or equal to 2,000, then he gets 8%. Well, if not, then if D7 is greater than 1,500, he gets 5%. Otherwise, if D7 is greater than or equal to 1,000, then he gets 2%. Wonderful formula. Step 6, watch the parentheses. This is our function that we've just created. It looks huge, but I think it makes more sense now because it's an if function inside of an if function inside of an if function. But I think working through this exercise really helps to understand it. The biggest and most important part to understand is you need to watch those parentheses. Every time you replace the last 0 with an if function, you need to be sure that you have another parenthesis at the end. You don't just close out the whole thing with one closing parenthesis. If you look here, I have 3 closing parentheses. So let me show this to you. The first set of parentheses is on our very last or most inner function with the D7 with 1,000, D7 times 2, 0. That's our first set of parentheses, our innermost. And then I have to match up the next two, so I'm at the D7 greater than or equal to 1,500. The parentheses right there. And then finally, the third one where the D7 is greater than or equal to 2,000, the opening is there and the closing is there. So we need to be sure that our parentheses do match and they're in the right place. All right, now that we understand this, let's practice. So let's take a look at Sally's sales report. If you notice on the right-hand side, that's the exact same chart that I had in our PowerPoint presentation. You'll also notice that I have filled out the first column with the answers already. If I click on the first cell, take a look at this function in the top up here. Notice that that is the exact same function that we discovered within our PowerPoint presentation. So that if B4 is greater than or equal to 2,000, then B4 gets 8%. Otherwise, if B4 is greater than or equal to 1,500, then B4 times 5%. Otherwise, if B4 is greater than or equal to 1,000, then B4 times 2%. Otherwise, 0. So you can see that if we examine every one of our cells, that we can calculate what the percentage is. So the first one is $2,072. I'm looking over here. That must be above 2,000. So the 2,072 times 8% must be, and I'm going to calculate it right here, 2,072 times 8% is definitely $165. Wonderful. Let's look at the next one, $1,295. $1,295 looks like it's going to fit right here. So that means this person would get 2%. Let's try this out. 1295 times 2%. That would, that would give us 2590. And yes, that is what they received. So you can see then that we are basically using the scale to calculate their commission. Even though the function is long and huge, we have learned previously how to correctly create the function. Now, I would like to go through the process of how I do this function. So I'm going to this sheet. Again, we have the exact same scale. We've got the exact same names and the cells. I have just removed the commission column. So watch carefully how I do this. I'm going to work on this one here, the one that says if it's greater than 2,000. If B4 is greater than or equal to, whoops, forgot the parenthesis. Your function always requires a parenthesis, 2,000. Then B4 times 8%, otherwise receives 0. So it looks good. I'm going to go ahead and copy this. I'm going to put this right here, and I'm going to copy this down. As you can see, a few people did get a value. These people, and I like to notation, these are Bob's notes right here, notes. I like to say that this is above 2,000. That one there, that one. You don't have to do this on your homework assignments, but to me, I just like to see which ones are above 2,000. Then I have all these empty ones that I have to deal with. Well, my next function is going to calculate the one that says he's above 1,500. Then he gets 5%. So again, I'm going to come down here. I'm going to say if, and then again, I'm still looking at the first cell, is greater than or equal to 1,500. Then he gets the B4 times 5%, otherwise 0. So that's our second function. Now, this is something you don't want to do. You don't want to take the second function, copy it, and then start here and paste it, because we want to be sure all the functions are correct. So I will come and I'll copy everything except the equal sign, and I will go to the first function, go up into my formula bar, and take that 0. I like to highlight it, and then paste, enter. Now I'm going to come back to this first function, copy it down, and all the numbers now that I see are the ones that are greater than 1,500. So just 2 more popped in. I don't see any others. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Yep, just 2 more. Now we're ready for the third and the last one. We are now going to calculate the one that says if he's above 1,000. Equals if the first cells is greater than or equal to 1,000, then is going to be multiplied by 2%, otherwise 0. If B4 is greater than or equal to 1,000, then B4 times 2%, otherwise 0. Now, the way I'm copying these formulas, if you want to do it like this on your homework, it's okay. The way I'm copying the formulas is I don't just copy the cell and come up here and go into the 0 and place it. What I do is I double click the cell where I entered my formula. I copy everything. I hit my home key, my right arrow key, and then I do a shift and I hit the end key, shift end, and I copy only this section. So I'm only copying everything after the 0. I hit my Control C to copy. Then I'll hit Escape. I come back to the first commission. I go right to that last 0. I actually click before the 0. Then I do a Shift right arrow to select the 0. And then I'm going to paste Control V as in victory. Control V. Now I hit Enter. Come back up to the top. Copy this down. And all the ones now that have values are the ones that are above 1,000. I'm going to type greater than 1,000. Greater than 1,000. And all the cells now that have numbers. Greater than 1,000 here. Greater than 1,000 here. Greater than 1,000 here. And the last 2 are zeros. So we can see then that this person must be below 1,000. And this person down here. And this person here. So 3 people did not even make it on the board. 3 people do not get commission because they did not make enough sales. All right. I hope that helps in explaining the nested if function, or in this case, the triple nested if function. Take care. See you in the next video.